I'm Layla, 29, and I just heard the most ridiculous thing come out of my own mother's mouth. Women don't need property. That's what husbands are for, she announced while I stood in the kitchen of my newly paid-off apartment, holding the deed I'd just received from the bank. 5 years of eating ramen noodles, working double shifts as a pediatric nurse, and skipping every vacation suddenly felt meaningless. Derek needs this more than you do, she continued, waving a stack of legal papers like they were grocery coupons. Sign these transfer documents. A man should own property, not a single woman playing house. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Patricia Williams. But here's the thing about my family. They've always underestimated me. And apparently, they've never heard of the 21st century. I smiled sweetly and set down my coffee mug. Mom, that's fascinating. Really fascinating. Because while she was busy planning how to gift my hard-earned apartment to my unemployed 32-year-old brother, she had no idea about the little insurance policy I'd discovered in Derek's past. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. So how did I get here? Standing in my own kitchen being told to give away my home. Let me take you back 6 months when this whole nightmare started brewing. I'd just signed the final paperwork at the bank, officially owning my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Portland. 7 years of nursing school debt, 5 years of saving every penny, and countless nights of wondering if home ownership was just a fantasy for people like me. The apartment wasn't much. 650 square feet on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian, with original hardwood floors that creaked in interesting ways, and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. But it was mine. Every scratch on the floor, every slightly crooked cabinet door, every view of the city skyline from my tiny balcony belonged to me. I called Jessica first, my best friend since nursing school, practically vibrating with excitement. Jess, I did it. I actually did it. The bank just handed me the deed. Layla! She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. This is huge! We're celebrating tonight. Champagne, fancy dinner, the works. Then I made the mistake of calling my parents. Dad answered with his usual distracted tone, clearly half listening while watching his afternoon news program. That's nice, honey. Your mother wants to talk to you. Patricia Williams took the phone with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to discuss tax preparation. You bought that little place downtown? The one you showed us pictures of? Her tone suggested I'd purchased a cardboard box under a bridge. Yes, Mom. I closed today. I own it outright, no mortgage. I tried to inject pride into my voice, hoping some of it might transfer to her. Silence. Then, well, I suppose that's something, though I don't understand why you didn't wait. Derek's been looking at properties too, and with his business experience, he could have helped you make a better choice. Derek's business experience. That was rich, considering his most recent business experience involved a failed attempt to flip furniture he bought at garage sales, which resulted in our parents' garage becoming a monument to unfinished projects and wasted money. I'm happy with my choice, Mom, if you say so. Well, I should go. Your father's making dinner. That was it. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the years of sacrifice it took to get here. No recognition that their daughter had just achieved something significant. Just dismissal, wrapped in polite disinterest. I hung up feeling deflated but not surprised. This was the Williams family dynamic I'd known my entire life. Derek was the golden child, the one with potential, the one whose dreams mattered. I was the practical one, the one who handled responsibilities, the one who apparently didn't need emotional support because I was so self-sufficient. That evening, Jessica and I celebrated at Rosetta's, a tiny Italian place with mismatched chairs and the best carbonara in the city. To Layla, she raised her glass of Prosecco, who proves every day that you don't need anyone else to make your dreams come true. To having friends who actually care about my achievements. I clinked her glass, feeling grateful for at least one person who understood the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. Your parents will come around, Jessica said, reading my expression. Once they see how well you've done for yourself, they'll realize they should have been supporting you all along. I wanted to believe her. Really, I did. But Jessica didn't know the Williams family the way I did. She'd never watched my parents empty their savings account to fund Derek's latest entrepreneurial fantasy while telling me that student loans built character. She'd never seen them beam with pride over Derek's community college graduation while missing my nursing school honors ceremony because it conflicted with his birthday dinner. Still, I held on to a small hope that homeownership might finally earn me some respect in their eyes. After all, how could they not be proud of a daughter who'd achieved financial independence and property ownership by age 29? I was about to find out just how spectacularly wrong I could be. The irony of my mother's demand became crystal clear When I remembered how we both got to this point, while I spent 5 years living like a financial monk to afford my apartment, Derek spent the same 5 years perfecting the art of adult dependency, because apparently, being 3 years older than me qualified him as the family investment opportunity. Let me paint you a picture of our respective financial journeys. In 2019, when I started seriously saving for a down payment, I moved into a studio apartment that was basically a glorified closet with a Murphy bed. My monthly budget looked like a financial diet plan: $200 for groceries, $50 for entertainment, and every extra dollar funneled into my future home savings account. Meanwhile, Derek moved back into our childhood bedroom because his consulting business wasn't generating enough income to cover rent. Mom called it a temporary arrangement. That was 3 years ago. Apparently, temporary in the Williams family means until further notice. My savings strategy involved picking up every extra shift the hospital offered, working holidays for time-and-a-half pay, and selling plasma twice a week because every $50 counted. I drove a 2008 Honda Civic that had seen better decades and bought clothes exclusively from thrift stores. Derek's financial strategy involved weekly dinners at our parents' house, where he'd casually mention running low on funds for his various business ventures. Mom would slip him a couple $100s with the understanding that this was seed money for his next big breakthrough. Funny how the seed money never grew into anything except more requests for seed money. I tracked every expense in a spreadsheet, color-coded and categorized down to the penny. Derek's approach to money management resembled a toddler with an unlimited candy budget: spend until it's gone, then ask for more. The day I hit my savings goal, I called Dad to share the news. "Congratulations, sweetheart," he said, and for a moment I thought he actually understood the significance. Then he added, "Derek's been looking at a house in the suburbs. Maybe you could help him with his down payment since you're so good with money." Even my financial discipline was just another resource for Derek to benefit from. Because why celebrate your daughter's achievement when you can immediately figure out how it serves your son? But here's what my family never bothered to learn about me during those 5 years of sacrifice. I'm not just good with money, I'm good with information. When you work in a hospital, you develop certain skills. Attention to detail, pattern recognition, the ability to spot when something doesn't add up. And Derek's finances had never added up. 3 weeks after Mom's apartment demand, I was organizing my desk when I found an old credit report I'd pulled years ago to check my score before applying for the mortgage. Something caught my eye. A notation about an inquiry from a lender I didn't recognize, dated 2 years ago. That's odd, I thought. I hadn't applied for any credit around that time, unless you count the mortgage application, but that was much more recent. I pulled my current credit report, just to be thorough. Clean as a whistle, exactly as expected. But that old inquiry nagged at me like a song stuck on repeat. Over the next few days, the question bothered me like a mosquito bite. I found myself thinking about it during work, wondering if it was just an error or something more significant. Then Jessica mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Remember when Derek asked you for help with that loan application a few years back?" she said during our weekly coffee date. "He said he needed your credit score for some kind of business reference?" I nearly choked on my latte. "What loan application?" "You know, when he was starting that landscaping thing. He said he needed to list your income and credit as a reference because you were such a good example of financial responsibility." My stomach dropped faster than Derek's last business venture. Derek had asked me for my social security number around that time, claiming he needed it for some kind of family business registration. I'd given it to him because, well, he was my brother. Family helped family, right? Clearly, I'd missed the memo about family helping themselves to my identity. "Jessica," I said slowly, "I never gave permission for any loan application." Her face went pale. "Layla, you don't think he would have used my information without permission?" "Yeah, I'm starting to think exactly that." That evening, I called the credit monitoring service and requested a detailed history of all inquiries and applications associated with my social security number over the past 5 years. The results arrived 3 days later, and they were worse than I'd imagined. Not only had Derek applied for a personal loan using my credit information as a reference, he'd somehow managed to open a credit card account that should have required my signature. The card had a $25,000 limit, and according to the statements, it had been maxed out within 6 months. My hands shook as I read through the documentation. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or family favoritism anymore. This was identity theft. This was fraud. And apparently, this was what passed for business ventures in Derek's world. Derek had been so confident that I'd never find out that he'd been living in our parents' house for 3 years, playing the role of the struggling entrepreneur while stealing from me to fund his lifestyle. I sat in my legitimately purchased apartment, surrounded by furniture I'd saved for and decorations I'd chosen, and realized that my Asna manga wasn't just metaphorical. I had actual documentation of criminal activity. activity that could put Derek in serious legal trouble and potentially force my parents to confront the reality of who their golden child actually was. The question was what to do with this information, but for the first time in this whole mess, I was holding all the cards. 2 days after discovering Derek's little financial creativity project, Mom called with an update on the apartment transfer situation, because apparently she thought I'd been sitting around just waiting to sign my life away. Clearly, she'd confused me with someone who enjoyed being robbed by relatives. "Layla, honey, we've scheduled a meeting with Derek's legal representative next Tuesday. Can you take the afternoon off from work?" I nearly laughed. His legal representative. Derek, who couldn't afford rent, somehow had retained legal counsel to help steal my apartment. The family's financial priorities were really something to behold. "Mom, I'm not signing anything. We've been over this." Silence. Then the guilt trip began. "I don't understand what's happened to you. This selfish attitude isn't the daughter I raised. Derek needs stability to get his life back on track. And family supports family. Family supports family." That phrase had been used to justify so many questionable decisions over the years. Derek needed support with car payments. Derek needed support with business expenses. Derek needed support with credit card bills he'd opened in my name. Somehow, the support only flowed in one direction, like a river that had forgotten how gravity worked. "When has Derek ever supported me, Mom?" Another silence. Longer this time. "That's different. Derek's going through a difficult period. You've always been the strong one. Strong, independent, self-sufficient. All code words for, we expect you to handle everything yourself while we focus on Derek's problems." It was like being praised for breathing. Technically accurate, but mainly because the alternative was death. "I need to go, Mom. I'm at work." "Just think about it, sweetheart. Family is all we have in the end." I hung up and immediately called Jessica. "They want to have a legal meeting to discuss transferring my apartment to Derek." "They what?" Jessica's voice could have cut glass. "Layla, please tell me you're not actually considering this." "Of course not. But get this. Derek apparently has a legal representative now. How does an unemployed person afford a legal representative?" "Excellent question. I'm guessing the same way he afforded to max out a credit card in my name." Jessica sucked in a breath. "You found more evidence?" "I found a lot more evidence. And I'm starting to think this apartment grab isn't just about Derek needing a place to live. I think they're in deeper financial trouble than they're letting on." That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to my parents' house unannounced and let myself in with the key I'd had since high school. The house felt different somehow, smaller and more cluttered than I remembered. Also, significantly more expensive to maintain than Derek's contribution of $0 could cover. Derek was in the living room, sprawled across the couch with his laptop, looking completely at home in his perpetual adolescence. When he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been guilt, if Derek were capable of that emotion. "Hey, sis. Mom said you might stop by." "Actually, Mom doesn't know I'm here." I sat down across from him, studying his face. "We need to talk. If this is about the apartment thing, you don't understand the full situation. Then explain it to me." Derek closed his laptop and leaned forward, adopting the serious expression he usually reserved for asking our parents for money. "Look, I know how it sounds, but I've got some business opportunities coming up. Real opportunities this time. Not like the other stuff. But I need an address that shows stability. You know, property ownership. And you can't get your own property because credit issues." He said it like it was a minor inconvenience, like having a stuffy nose or running out of coffee. "What kind of credit issues, Derek?" His jaw tightened. "Nothing major. Just some misunderstandings with lenders." "Misunderstandings? That's an interesting way to put it." I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. "Derek, when you applied for that business loan 2 years ago, the one where you needed my social security number for reference purposes, did you happen to mention that you were using my information for more than just reference?" The color drained from his face faster than water down a bathtub drain. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because I have documentation that suggests otherwise." We stared at each other across the coffee table where we'd played board games as children, and I realized that somewhere along the way, Derek had stopped being my annoying little brother and had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could look me in the eye and lie without hesitation. It was like watching a magic trick, except instead of making quarters disappear, he made integrity vanish. "How much do you owe, Derek?" "I don't—" "How much?" His shoulders sagged. "Around 25,000. "To whom?" "Various creditors. Some private lenders." Private lenders. That was a phrase that made my nurse-trained brain immediately think of worst-case scenarios. "Derek, please tell me you didn't borrow money from loan sharks. They're legitimate business people." "That's not an answer." He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Look, I got in over my head, okay? These opportunities required upfront investment, and I thought I could turn things around quickly, using my credit. I was going to pay it back before you found out, but you didn't. The timing got complicated. I felt a familiar exhaustion settling over me, the same feeling I got after working a particularly difficult shift at the hospital. Derek, do you understand that what you did is identity theft? That it's a felony? You're being dramatic. We're family. Family doesn't commit fraud against each other. I didn't commit fraud. I just borrowed your credibility for a while. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize someone you've known your entire life is essentially a stranger? Drop a comment below if you've ever felt that cold recognition that a family member isn't who you thought they were. Because what happened next changed everything. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed my worst suspicions about Derek's financial situation. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the woman's voice was professional and slightly apologetic. Ms. Williams? This is Sandra Chen from Pacific Northwest Credit Services. I'm calling regarding an overdue account in your name. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. I'm sorry, what account? Account number ending in 7834, opened approximately 2 years ago. The account is currently 60 days past due with a balance of $25,000. $25,000. The exact amount Derek had confessed to owing. What a delightful coincidence. I grabbed a pen with shaking hands. Can you give me more details about when and how this account was opened? Certainly. The application was submitted online 2 years ago, and the account has been used primarily for cash advances and balance transfers. 2 years ago. That was right around the time Derek claimed he was launching his consulting business and needed my social security number for business registration purposes. Funny how business registration had morphed into identity theft so seamlessly. I need to file a fraud report, I said. I never authorized this account. Sandra's tone became more sympathetic. I understand this is distressing. We'll need you to submit a formal dispute along with a police report. I can email you the necessary forms. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment's tiny kitchen, staring at my coffee mug and trying to process the magnitude of Derek's deception. It wasn't just one credit card. It wasn't just using my information as a reference. He had systematically stolen my identity to fund his lifestyle for nearly 2 years, and here I'd thought his biggest talent was disappointing our parents. I called Jessica, my hands still trembling. Layla, you need to call the police right now, she said after I explained the situation. He's my brother. He's a criminal. And if you don't stop this now, he'll destroy your credit and potentially leave you responsible for debts you didn't create. She was right, of course. But the thought of filing a police report against Derek made me feel sick. Despite everything, despite his selfishness and lies, he was still family. Although apparently, family meant something very different to him than it did to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Derek's legal representative wants to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please don't be difficult about this. The irony was overwhelming. They wanted to meet with a legal representative to discuss transferring my legally purchased apartment to Derek, while Derek was actively committing identity theft against me. It was like being asked to hand over your car keys to someone who'd already stolen your credit cards while you watched. I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of calling the police immediately, I called a different kind of authority. Marcus Patterson, attorney at law. Mr. Patterson, my name is Layla Williams. I need legal advice regarding identity theft and property transfer issues. I see. Can you come in this afternoon? I have an opening at 4. Marcus Patterson's office was everything Derek's supposed legal representative probably wasn't. Professional, organized, and legitimately accredited. Marcus himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of focused attention that made you feel like your problems actually mattered. So let me understand this correctly, he said after I'd explained the situation. Your brother has used your personal information to open at least one credit account without your permission, accumulated significant debt, and now your family wants you to transfer property to him to help with his financial problems? That sums it up perfectly. Also, my family apparently thinks this is all totally reasonable. And you have documentation of the fraudulent accounts? I pulled out the printed emails and credit reports I'd gathered. Everything's here. Marcus reviewed the documents with the thoroughness of someone who understood exactly how serious this was. Ms. Williams, your brother has committed multiple felonies. Identity theft, fraud, possibly federal crimes if he used mail or electronic systems to facilitate the theft. I know, but he's my brother. That doesn't change the legal reality. In fact, it makes it worse. Family members who commit identity theft often cause more damage because victims are reluctant to report them. What are my options? Legally, you need to file a police report and dispute these accounts immediately. Every day you wait makes it harder to prove you weren't complicit. And practically, Marcus leaned back in his chair. Practically, you're in a strong position. Your brother doesn't know that you've discovered his activities. You have leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that ends this apartment transfer nonsense permanently. I felt something shift inside me, a combination of relief and determination. For the first time since Mom had made her ridiculous demand, I had a plan that didn't involve me sacrificing everything for Derek's benefit. What do you recommend? We attend this meeting with his legal representative tomorrow, we listen to their proposal, and then we make a counteroffer they'll never forget. Which is? Marcus smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. Derek can face criminal charges for identity theft, or he can sign a legally binding agreement to never contact you about property transfers again, and to take full responsibility for the debts he created in your name. And if he refuses, then you file the police report we're going to prepare today, and Derek learns what real consequences feel like. That evening, I sat in my apartment, my legitimately purchased, rightfully owned apartment, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power, control. The ability to make decisions based on what was best for me instead of what would keep everyone else comfortable. Derek had spent years assuming I would always be the responsible one, the one who cleaned up messes and asked for nothing in return. He'd gotten so comfortable with my compliance that he'd escalated to actual theft, confident that family loyalty would protect him from consequences. Tomorrow, he was going to learn that he'd been wrong about me all along. The law office Derek had chosen for our meeting was exactly what I'd expected: a strip mall storefront wedged between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The kind of place that advertised quick divorces and bankruptcy solutions on laminated signs in the window. Nothing says legitimate legal practice, like a fish tank with one sad-looking goldfish. I arrived with Marcus, who looked like he'd stepped out of a courtroom drama in his tailored suit and leather briefcase. The contrast between his obvious competence and Derek's bargain basement legal representation was almost comical. Mom, Dad, and Derek were already seated around a folding table that had seen better decades. Derek's legal representative turned out to be a man named Bob Hutchins, whose office decor consisted primarily of motivational posters and said fish tank. I was starting to understand how Derek could afford legal representation. He'd found the Walmart of attorneys. Ms. Williams, Bob began, consulting a file folder. I understand there's been some resistance to this straightforward property transfer. Straightforward, Marcus repeated, his voice carrying just enough skepticism to make everyone uncomfortable. That's an interesting characterization. Bob cleared his throat. Family arrangements often seem complex to outside observers, but Mr. Derek Williams has explained the circumstances. His sister graciously purchased this property with the understanding that it would eventually transfer to him for business purposes. I almost laughed out loud. Derek had apparently convinced this discount attorney that I'd bought my apartment as some kind of placeholder purchase for his future use. Because clearly that's how real estate works in Derek's fantasy world. Could you show me the documentation supporting that arrangement? Marcus asked politely. Bob shuffled through his papers. Well, these things are often based on verbal agreements between family members. I see, verbal agreements. Verbal... Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. How interesting, because I have written documentation that tells a very different story. Derek's face went pale faster than milk left in the sun. Mom looked confused. Dad leaned forward with the expression he usually wore when trying to assert authority in situations where he had none. What kind of documentation? Derek asked, his voice carefully controlled. Oh, the usual, Marcus said conversationally. Credit reports, bank statements, fraud notifications, the kind of paperwork that tends to accumulate when someone commits identity theft. The silence in the room was deafening. Bob looked like he'd swallowed his goldfish. Derek stared at the table like it might offer him an escape route. Identity theft? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. What is he talking about, Derek? There's been a misunderstanding, Derek said quickly. Some paperwork got mixed up. Paperwork got mixed up, Marcus repeated. Mr. Williams, opening credit accounts using someone else's social security number isn't a paperwork mix-up. It's a felony. Dad found his voice. Now wait just a minute. This is a family matter and we don't need outside interference. Mr. Williams? Marcus addressed my father with the kind of patient tone you'd use with a particularly slow child. Identity theft is a federal crime. It stopped being a family matter the moment your son decided to impersonate your daughter for financial gain. I watched Derek's face cycle through emotions, fear, anger, desperation, and finally something that looked like defeat. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when Derek would have to face consequences instead of having them smoothed away by family intervention. Derek, I said quietly, how much do you actually owe? He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Layla, I can explain. How much? $25,000, he said finally. Total. And these are legitimate business debts? Marcus asked. Derek shifted in his seat. Some of them might be from private lenders. Private lenders, Dad repeated. Derek, what kind of private lenders? People who loan money when banks won't. Mom looked like she might faint. Derek, please tell me you didn't borrow money from criminals. They're not criminals, Mom. They're just informal lenders. Marcus and I exchanged a look. Informal lenders who worked with people in Derek's situation rarely limited themselves to legal collection methods. And these informal lenders, Marcus said. I assume they're expecting repayment on a specific timeline? Derek nodded miserably. Which is why the apartment transfer suddenly became urgent, I said, understanding finally clicking into place. You need to show them you have collateral. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. I stood up, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Derek, you stole my identity, accumulated massive debts, and now you want to steal my apartment to use as collateral for loans from dangerous people. I was going to pay you back. With what money? You don't have a job, you don't have income, you don't have any way to pay anyone back. Bob Hutchins cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we could discuss a payment plan arrangement. No, I said simply. We couldn't. Marcus pulled a document from his folder. Actually, we have a different proposal. Mr. Derek Williams can sign this agreement acknowledging his fraudulent use of his sister's identity, agreeing to take full responsibility for all debts incurred, and waiving any claim to her property in perpetuity. And if he doesn't sign? Dad asked. Then Ms. Williams files criminal charges and Mr. Derek Williams faces federal prosecution for identity theft, fraud, and whatever other charges the prosecutor decides to pursue. I looked around the table at my family, Mom pale and shaken, Dad trying to project authority he didn't have, Derek looking like a cornered animal, and Bob Hutchins probably regretting his career choices. Derek, I said, you have until tomorrow morning to decide. Sign the agreement or I file the police report. I stood up, Marcus following my lead. Oh, and Derek, the apartment was never yours. It was never going to be yours. It's mine, and it's staying mine. What do you think will happen next? Will Derek sign the agreement or try to find another way out of this mess? Drop your predictions in the comments below. That evening, my phone started ringing at 7 p.m. and didn't stop until after midnight. First Mom, then Dad, then Derek, then Mom again. Each conversation followed the same basic script. How could I destroy my own family over money? Where was my compassion? Couldn't I see that Derek was struggling? The calls became increasingly desperate as the night wore on. By 11 p.m., Mom was crying. By midnight, Dad was making threats about disowning me if I went through with filing charges. Because apparently threatening to disown the daughter who's been financially responsible her entire life is excellent strategy. I turned off my phone and made myself a cup of tea, sitting in my living room surrounded by the furniture I'd saved for, and the peace I'd worked so hard to achieve. For the first time in years, I felt completely clear about what needed to happen. The next morning, Derek showed up at my apartment at 6 a.m., looking like he hadn't slept. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway with red-rimmed eyes and the kind of desperate energy that comes from realizing you're completely out of options. Layla, we need to talk. We talked yesterday. You have until this morning to sign the agreement. I can't sign that. You don't understand the situation. I let him into my apartment, mostly because I didn't want to have this conversation in the hallway where my neighbors could hear. Derek looked around my living room like he was seeing it for the first time, taking in the carefully chosen furniture and the photographs on the walls. Nice place, he said, and for a moment, he almost sounded like the brother I remembered from childhood. Derek, just sign the agreement. Take responsibility for your debts and leave me out of it. It's not that simple. He sat down on my couch without being invited. The people I owe money to, they're not going to accept I take full responsibility as payment. That's not my problem. They think it is. Something cold settled in my stomach. What does that mean? They know about the apartment. They know about your job at the hospital. They think we're a family business arrangement. I felt the blood drain from my face. Derek, what exactly did you tell these people? I may have implied that you were a silent partner in my business ventures. You what? I needed them to believe I had backing, collateral. So I mentioned that my sister was a successful nurse with property and steady income. I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd done. Not only had Derek stolen my identity and accumulated massive debts, he'd essentially painted a target on my back for loan sharks, who now believed I was involved in his financial mess. It was like handing out my address to debt collectors with a note that said, "Please harass this person." Derek, do these people know where I live? I didn't give them your address. That's not what I asked. He looked away. They might have done some research. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus. I need you to call the police. Now. Layla, wait. Derek stood up, panic in his voice. If you file charges against me, these people are going to think you're trying to distance yourself from our business arrangement. They won't accept that. There is no business arrangement. They don't know that. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of surreal nightmare. Derek's stupidity and desperation had created a situation where doing the right thing legally might put me in physical danger from criminals who believed I was his business partner. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with a police detective named Sarah Rodriguez. Detective Rodriguez was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to our story with the kind of professional attention that suggested she'd dealt with similar family fraud cases before. "Mr. Williams," she said, after Derek had reluctantly explained the situation, "you've put your sister in an extremely dangerous position. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Intent doesn't matter to loan sharks. What matters is that you've represented your sister as a business partner and collateral source to people who use violence to collect debts." I felt sick. "Detective Rodriguez, what are my options? Legally, we can arrest Mr. Williams for identity theft right now. But practically, that might make your situation with these lenders worse before it gets better. So what do you recommend? We need to be strategic. First, we document everything. Second, we set up a controlled resolution that protects you while ensuring Mr. Williams faces appropriate consequences." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of controlled resolution?" "Mr. Williams provides us with detailed information about these lenders. Names, contact information, amounts owed, terms of the loans. We investigate them for illegal lending practices while negotiating his sister's complete separation from any financial arrangements." Derek looked terrified. "If I give you their information, they'll know I cooperated with police." "Derek," I said, my voice deadly calm, "you created this situation. You stole my identity, lied to dangerous people about my involvement in your debts, and put my safety at risk. You're going to fix it." "I can't." "You can, and you will." Detective Rodriguez opened her notebook. "Mr. Williams, let's start with names." For the next hour, Derek provided details about his web of debts and lenders. 3 different groups, $25,000 total, with payment schedules that were already in default. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd been desperately juggling debts for months, borrowing from one source to pay another, with my identity and assets as his ultimate insurance policy. When we finished, Detective Rodriguez closed her notebook. "Ms. Williams, you're going to need to be very careful for the next few weeks while we sort this out. These people may attempt to contact you directly. What do I do if they do?" "You refer them to me immediately. Under no circumstances do you agree to any payments or arrangements." As they prepared to leave, Derek turned to me with an expression that might have been remorse. "Layla, I never meant for you to get hurt. But you were perfectly fine with me losing my apartment. That's different." "No, Derek, it's not different. It's exactly the same. You've spent your entire adult life assuming that my life, my work, my achievements exist for your benefit. You stole my identity because you've never seen me as a separate person with my own rights. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my life without wanting something from me? When was the last time you celebrated my achievements instead of figuring out how they could help you?" Derek didn't answer because we both knew there wasn't an answer. After they left, I sat in my apartment and realized that the next few weeks were going to test everything I thought I knew about standing up for myself. It was one thing to face down family pressure and legal manipulation. It was another thing entirely to deal with criminals who believed I owed them money. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing it alone. I had Marcus, Detective Rodriguez, and the knowledge that I'd done nothing wrong. Derek had created this mess, and Derek was going to help fix it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Derek's business arrangement. Call this number." I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Detective Rodriguez. Then I turned off my phone and made another cup of tea. Let the games begin. The games began sooner than I expected. 2 days after Derek's confession session with Detective Rodriguez, I came home from work to find a man in an expensive suit sitting in a sedan across from my building. He wasn't trying to hide. In fact, he seemed to want me to notice him, because nothing says professional debt collection like obvious surveillance. I called Detective Rodriguez from the lobby of my building. "I see him," she said. I hadn't even finished describing the situation. "Don't go up to your apartment yet. Walk to the coffee shop on the corner and wait for me there." "How did you know?" "Because we've been watching your building since yesterday. These people don't waste time." 20 minutes later, Detective Rodriguez joined me at a tiny table in the corner of Grind Coffee, a hipster place with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their latte art seriously. She looked tired, but alert, like someone who'd been dealing with cases like this for too long. "Mr. Williams provided us with information about 3 separate lending operations," she said, keeping her voice low. "The man watching your building works for the largest one, Tony Castellano's operation. Is that supposed to mean something to me?" Castellano runs what they call a collection service. Technically legal, but they specialize in high-pressure tactics for collecting debts that traditional banks won't touch. High-pressure tactics: surveillance, workplace visits, contact with family members and employers. They stay just inside the law, but they're very effective at making people's lives uncomfortable until they pay. I thought about my peaceful apartment, my routine at the hospital, the quiet life I'd worked so hard to build. How long will this last? Depends on how quickly we can convince them that you're not responsible for Derek's debts. And how do we do that? Detective Rodriguez smiled grimly. Derek's going to call them. An hour later, we were in a conference room at the police station with Derek, Marcus, and a recording device. Derek looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week, unshaven, exhausted, and finally starting to understand the scope of what he'd done. "You're going to call Tony Castellano," Detective Rodriguez explained, "and you're going to explain that your sister has no involvement in your business debts. You're going to make it clear that any attempt to collect from her will be considered harassment." "They're not going to believe that," Derek said. "I told them she was my business partner." "Then you're going to tell them you lied. They'll be angry." "Derek," I said, finding my voice, "I don't care if they're angry. I care about getting my life back." The phone call was surreal. Derek, under police supervision, explaining to a man named Tony that his sister was not, in fact, involved in his business ventures and would not be responsible for his debts. Tony's voice came through the speaker clear enough for all of us to hear. "Derek, you told me your sister was backing your operations. You said she had property and income that could secure your loans." "I know what I said, but I exaggerated. Layla doesn't know anything about my business deals." "So you lied to me." "I guess I did." The silence on the other end was intimidating even through a speakerphone. When Tony finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Derek, lying to me about collateral is a very serious problem. I understand. Do you? Because now I have a $25,000 problem with no clear solution." Detective Rodriguez gestured for Derek to continue with the script they'd prepared. "I'm working on getting the money," Derek said. "But my sister can't help. She doesn't have access to that kind of cash." "What about the apartment?" "It's not available." Another long silence. "Derek, I think you and I need to have a face-to-face conversation about your payment schedule." "Okay. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, you know where." The line went dead. Derek looked like he might throw up. "Well," Detective Rodriguez said, "that went about as well as expected." "Is he in danger?" I asked, surprising myself by actually caring about Derek's safety despite everything he'd done. Castellano's operation doesn't typically use violence for first collections. They'll pressure him, make his life difficult, but they're not going to break his legs over $25,000. "What about me?" "That call should have made it clear that pursuing you isn't worth their time, but we'll keep monitoring your building for a few more days." That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to process the bizarre turn my life had taken. 3 weeks ago, my biggest problem was my mother's ridiculous demand that I give my apartment to Derek. Now I was under police protection because my brother had involved me in loans from criminals. It was like starring in a soap opera I'd never auditioned for. My phone rang. "Mom, Layla, your father and I think you're handling this all wrong." "Really? How so?" "This police involvement is making everything worse. Derek made some mistakes, but families should handle family problems privately." I almost laughed. "Mom, Derek committed identity theft and told loan sharks I was his business partner. This stopped being a family problem when he made it a criminal matter. He's your brother. And I'm your daughter. When do my rights and safety start to matter?" "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I felt something snap inside me. "Mom, there are criminals watching my apartment because Derek lied about my involvement in his debts. How is that dramatic?" "Well, maybe if you'd just helped him in the first place, none of this would have happened." The logic was so twisted, so perfectly emblematic of our family dynamic, that I actually felt something like relief. This was who they were. This was who they'd always been. Derek's needs would always take precedence over my safety, my achievements, my right to live my own life. "Mom, I need to go." "Layla, wait. Your father and I think we should all sit down and work out a compromise." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. No more family meetings. No more compromises. No more discussions about transferring my apartment to Derek. I'm done. You can't just cut off your family. Watch me." I hung up and immediately blocked their numbers. Then I blocked Derek's number. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, looking around my apartment, my space, my achievement, my refuge from people who'd never understood my worth. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. What do you think will happen next? Will Derek manage to resolve his debts, or will this situation escalate further? Share your thoughts in the comments. The peace lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I woke up to my doorbell ringing at 6 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see Mom standing in the hallway holding a casserole dish and wearing her family crisis expression. Because apparently, when your son commits identity theft and involves criminals, the appropriate response is to bring baked goods. I considered not answering, but I knew she'd stand there all day if necessary. I opened the door with the chain lock still attached. Mom, what are you doing here? I brought you breakfast. We need to talk. We talked yesterday. I said everything I needed to say. Layla, please. This is tearing the family apart. I almost asked what family she was referring to, since our family dynamic seemed to consist of everyone else's needs mattering more than mine, but I was too tired for another circular conversation. I need to get ready for work. Can I come in, just for a minute? Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Mom walked into my living room and immediately started rearranging the throw pillows on my couch, a nervous habit she'd had for as long as I could remember. This is a lovely apartment, she said like she was seeing it for the first time. Thanks. Derek really could have made good use of this space. And there it was. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she was still focused on Derek's needs and how my life could serve them. It was like talking to a broken record that only played one song. Mom, Derek stole my identity and put me in danger. Do you understand that? He made some poor choices, but he's family. Family forgives. Family also protects each other. When did you ever protect me from Derek's choices? Mom sat down heavily on my couch. What do you mean? I mean, when did you ever tell Derek to leave me alone? When did you ever stand up for me when he was taking advantage of my kindness? When did you ever suggest that maybe Derek should solve his own problems instead of expecting me to sacrifice for him? That's different. Derek needed more support growing up. Why? The question seemed to catch her off guard. What do you mean, why? Why did Derek need more support? He's 3 years older than me. He had the same childhood, the same opportunities, the same parents. Why does he get unlimited chances while I get unlimited responsibilities? Mom fidgeted with the casserole dish. Derek was always more sensitive, more artistic. He needed encouragement. And what did I need? Silence. Mom, what did I need? You were always so capable, so independent. You didn't need as much help. There it was. The fundamental assumption that had shaped our family dynamic for my entire life. Derek needed help, so he got it. I didn't need help, so I gave it. Derek was sensitive, so everyone protected him. I was capable, so everyone expected me to handle things myself. It was like being praised for having good vision by people who refused to buy glasses for the person who was actually blind. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I was independent because I had to be? That maybe I became capable because no one else was going to solve my problems? Layla, you're being unfair. Am I? When I was struggling through nursing school, working 3 jobs to pay for tuition while Derek lived at home rent-free, was that fair? When I saved for 5 years to buy this apartment while you and Dad bankrolled Derek's failed business ventures, was that fair? We did what we thought was best for both of you. No, you did what was easiest. It was easier to give Derek money than to make him get a job. It was easier to ask me to sacrifice than to tell Derek no. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rodriguez. Surveillance ended. Castellanos people won't be bothering you anymore. I felt a wave of relief. At least one problem was resolved. Mom noticed my expression. Good news? The police situation with Derek's debts is handled. See? I told you everything would work out. I stared at her. Mom, it worked out because Derek faced consequences for his actions, and I refused to enable him. It didn't magically resolve itself. Well, regardless, now we can move past all this unpleasantness and go back to normal. Normal. The word hung in the air like a threat. Normal meant Derek's problems becoming my problems. Normal meant my achievements being minimized and my needs being ignored. Normal meant perpetual sacrifice for the comfort of people who'd never sacrificed anything for me. Mom, there is no going back to normal. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done. Done being the family cleanup crew. Done sacrificing my well-being for Derek's benefit. Done pretending that our family dynamic is healthy or fair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Mom stood up, clutching her casserole dish like armor. Your father isn't going to stand for this kind of disrespect. Then Dad can join Derek in the people whose opinions no longer matter to me category. Layla Marie Williams, we are your family. No, I said quietly. You're the people I happen to share DNA with. Family are the people who support you, celebrate your achievements, and have your back when things get difficult. Family doesn't steal your identity or demand you give up your home or put you in danger with criminals. Mom's face crumpled. So that's it? You're just going to cut us off? I'm going to live my life on my own terms. If you can figure out how to be part of that without demanding that I sacrifice myself for Derek's benefit, we can talk. Otherwise, yes, I'm done. After she left, I called Jessica. How do you feel? She asked after I'd explained the conversation. Scared, sad, free. It's weird. It's supposed to be weird. You just broke a pattern that's been in place for your entire life. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm being too harsh? Layla, criminals were watching your apartment because your brother lied about your involvement in his debts. And your mother's reaction was to bring you a casserole and suggest you should have just given him your apartment in the first place. You're not being too harsh. She was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. 3 weeks later, I was starting to believe that maybe I really could build a life free from my family's drama when Derek showed up at the hospital where I work. It was Thursday afternoon, and I was just finishing my shift when I saw him in the lobby, looking nervous and desperate. My stomach dropped. Derek knew better than to show up at my workplace. We'd made it clear through lawyers and police that contact needed to go through official channels. The fact that he was here meant something had gone very wrong. Or knowing Derek, something had gone exactly as expected. I approached him carefully, aware that my colleagues were watching. Derek, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. It's important. We agreed that all communication would go through our attorneys. This can't wait for attorneys. I looked around the busy hospital lobby, full of patients and visitors and people I worked with every day. The last thing I needed was Derek creating a scene at my job. 5 minutes, I said. Outside, we walked to a small garden area behind the hospital where staff sometimes took breaks. Derek looked worse than I'd seen him even during the police interrogations. Thinner, more anxious, like someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. Derek, what's going on? The payment plan I worked out with Castellano isn't working. That's not my problem. Layla, please, just listen. I got a job, a real job, working construction, but the pay schedule doesn't match up with what I owe them. They want a lump sum payment next week or they're going to take other measures. What kind of other measures? They're going to harass Mom and Dad. I felt a chill run down my spine. Derek, please tell me you didn't involve Mom and Dad in this. I didn't mean to. When I was trying to get them to stop pressuring you, I may have mentioned that my parents owned property. Derek, what did you do? I told them that if they couldn't collect from you, maybe they could work something out with my parents. I thought it would buy me time to figure out another solution. The magnitude of Derek's latest disaster hit me like a physical blow. Not only had he stolen my identity and put me in danger, he'd now redirected those same criminals toward our parents. It was like watching someone put out a fire by dousing it with gasoline. Do Mom and Dad know? Not yet. But they will when Castellano's people show up. I sat down on a nearby bench, trying to process this latest crisis. Our parents, for all their flaws, didn't deserve to have their retirement threatened because of Derek's stupidity. They were in their 60s, close to retirement, with limited ability to recover from a financial catastrophe. Derek, how much do you need to make this go away? $25,000. That's the lump sum that would settle the main debt. And you're telling me this because you're the only person I know who might have access to that kind of money. There it was. Derek wanted me to liquidate my savings, or take out a loan against my apartment, or find some other way to solve his problem. Even after everything, the identity theft, the criminal charges, the police investigation, he still saw me as his financial safety net. It was like watching someone ask for directions while standing on a map. Derek, I'm not giving you $25,000. I'll pay you back. With what money? You just said your construction job doesn't pay enough to cover your current debts. I'll figure something out. No, Derek, you won't figure something out. You never figure anything out. You create problems and expect other people to solve them. So you're just going to let Mom and Dad get harassed? And there was the manipulation I'd been expecting. Derek had created this situation, but somehow I would be responsible for the consequences if I didn't fix it. Derek, you're going to let Mom and Dad get harassed. This is your debt. Your poor choices? Your problem. They're your parents too. Yes, they are. And if you'd thought about that before you dragged them into your financial mess, maybe they wouldn't be in danger now. Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. I can't believe you're being this selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. Derek, you've stolen my identity, put me in danger with criminals, and now you want me to bankrupt myself to save Mom and Dad from the consequences of your choices. How exactly am I the selfish one in this scenario? Because you have the money and you won't help your own family. I have savings because I've worked for 7 years and lived below my means. You don't get to steal my financial security because you've destroyed your own. Fine. Derek's voice turned cold. But when Mom and Dad are being harassed by criminals, remember that you could have prevented it. He stalked away, leaving me sitting in the hospital garden feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I called Marcus immediately. Can Castellano actually harass your parents based on what Derek told them? I asked. If Derek suggested they were somehow involved in securing his debts, They might try intimidation tactics. But unless your parents actually guaranteed something, they don't have legal grounds for collection. But they could still make their lives miserable? Unfortunately, yes. The same way they were prepared to make your life miserable. I felt sick. My parents might be flawed, they might have failed me in significant ways, but they didn't deserve to have their retirement threatened by Derek's criminal behavior. Marcus, what are my options? Legally, you could let this play out and see what actually happens. Practically, you could consider helping with a loan that's secured against Derek's future earnings. Or you could let Derek face the full consequences of his choices and accept that sometimes people have to lose everything before they change. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to decide between protecting myself and protecting my parents. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek had managed to create a situation where my only choices were self-sacrifice or watching innocent people suffer for his mistakes. But then I remembered something Detective Rodriguez had said about documentation. I pulled out my phone and called her. Detective Rodriguez, is there any chance you're still investigating Castellanos' operation? Actually, yes. We've been building a case based on the information Derek provided. Why? Derek just told me they're threatening to harass my parents if he doesn't pay his debt. That would be extortion, and exactly the kind of evidence we need to shut them down permanently. What do you need me to do? Nothing. Just document any contact they make with your parents and report it immediately. Derek may have accidentally given us the tools to solve this problem for everyone. For the first time in days, I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge is letting criminals be criminals while the police are watching. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Detective Rodriguez's voice was calm but excited when she called at 8 a.m. Layla, we've got them. Got who? Castellanos' operation. We executed search warrants yesterday and found evidence of illegal lending practices, extortion, and fraud. The entire operation is being shut down. I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down. What does that mean for Derek's debt? Most of their outstanding loans are being voided as part of the investigation. The courts typically don't enforce debts from illegal lending operations. And my parents? Safe. In fact, Derek's threat about them being harassed helped us establish grounds for the extortion charges. I couldn't help but laugh. So Derek accidentally solved his own problem by trying to manipulate me? Pretty much, though he's still facing charges for the identity theft. That's a separate matter. After I hung up, I realized I needed to call my parents before they heard about this from Derek. The conversation was going to be awkward, but they deserved to know what had almost happened to them. Mom answered on the first ring. Layla, is everything okay? Actually, yes, everything's fine now. But I need to tell you about something Derek did. I explained the situation, the threats, the police investigation, and the resolution. When I finished, there was a long silence. So Derek told criminals we might be able to help with his debts? Dad's voice had joined the call. Yes, without asking you or even telling you about it. And if the police hadn't been investigating, these people might have come to our house? Yes. Another silence. Then Mom said something I'd never heard her say before. Derek lied to us. About what, specifically? He told us you were being unreasonable about the apartment transfer. He said it was just a temporary arrangement while he got his business started. He never mentioned stealing your identity or owing money to criminals. Because Derek only tells people what serves his purposes. He's been lying to all of us for years. Dad cleared his throat. Layla, we owe you an apology. The words hung in the air. In 30 years, I couldn't remember my parents ever apologizing to me for anything. What for? For not believing you. For pressuring you to sacrifice for Derek without understanding what we were asking. For treating your achievements like they mattered less than his problems. I felt tears starting in my eyes. Dad, no, let me finish. Your mother and I have been talking since you cut off contact. We've been so focused on helping Derek that we forgot we had another child who deserved our support too. Mom's voice was shaky. We thought Derek needed more help because he was struggling, but we never asked if you were struggling too. I was, I said quietly. I've been struggling my whole life to feel like I mattered to you as much as Derek did. You matter more than Derek, Dad said firmly. You've earned your success. You've been responsible and trustworthy. Derek has been taking advantage of our love and using it against his own family. What happens now? I asked. Now we learn how to be better parents, Mom said. If you'll let us. The conversation lasted another hour. We talked about boundaries, about respect, about the difference between helping and enabling. It wasn't perfect. 30 years of dysfunction doesn't get fixed in one phone call, but it was a start. When Derek called later that day, his tone was completely different. Layla, I heard about the police thing. You mean the police thing where your illegal lenders got arrested? Yeah. Look, I know I messed up. Again. Derek, you didn't mess up. You committed multiple felonies and put your entire family in danger. I know, and I'm going to make it right. How? I'm pleading guilty to the identity theft charges. No plea bargain, no reduced sentence. I'm taking full responsibility. I was genuinely surprised. Why? Because Marcus explained what could have happened to you. What could have happened to mom and dad. I could have gotten my family hurt because I was too proud to get a real job and too greedy to live within my means. Derek, no, let me finish. I've been in therapy since the police investigation started. Real therapy, not court-mandated stuff. And I'm starting to understand how toxic I've been. What does that mean practically? It means I'm going to jail for 18 months. When I get out, I'm going to live in a halfway house and work to pay back every penny I stole from you. It means I'm not going to contact you until I can prove I've actually changed, which my therapist says will take years. And if I'm not ready for contact even then I'll respect that. Because loving someone means caring about their well-being more than your own comfort. After Derek hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling something I'd never experienced before. Peace. Not the temporary quiet between crises, but actual peace. Derek was finally facing real consequences. My parents were finally seeing the situation clearly. The criminals were gone, and I was free to build the life I'd always wanted. Marcus called that evening. How are you feeling about everything? Relieved, confused, hopeful. Confused about what? About Derek. For the first time in my life, he sounded like he actually understood what he'd done wrong. People can change, Layla. But change takes time and consistent actions, not just words. I know. But maybe there's hope for our family after all. Maybe. But that's not your responsibility anymore. Your responsibility is to live your life and let other people earn their place in it. He was right. For 30 years, I'd been trying to fix my family's dysfunction. Now it was time to let them fix themselves while I focused on building something healthy. 6 months later, I was living a life I barely recognized. The apartment that had started this whole mess was now truly mine in every sense. Not just legally, but emotionally. No one was demanding I give it away. No one was questioning my right to own it. And no one was using it as leverage to manipulate me. I'd redecorated, adding artwork I actually liked instead of neutral pieces chosen to avoid criticism. I'd bought a dining table big enough for dinner parties and started hosting Jessica and my work friends for monthly potlucks. The space felt alive in a way it never had when I was constantly defending my right to exist in it. The relationship with my parents had evolved into something cautious but genuine. We had coffee once a month, neutral territory, conversations that focused on current events and shared interests rather than family drama. They were learning to see me as an individual rather than Derek's supporting cast, and I was learning to enjoy their company without the constant stress of managing family crises. Derek was living in a halfway house, working construction, and attending mandatory counseling as part of his probation agreement. According to Mom, he was doing well, but I'd learned to translate her optimism with appropriate skepticism. Derek had always been good at short-term compliance when facing consequences. My social life had expanded in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant drain of family drama, I had energy for friendships, hobbies, and even dating. Marcus and I had transitioned from attorney-client to something that might eventually become romantic, though we were taking things slowly, given how we'd met. The biggest surprise was how much I enjoyed my own company. For 30 years, I'd been so focused on managing other people's needs and emotions that I'd never really figured out what I wanted from life. Now I was discovering that I liked hiking, that I was good at photography, and that I had strong opinions about coffee and books and travel destinations. But the real test of my new boundaries came on a Tuesday evening in March when Mom called with news that made my stomach drop. Layla, Derek's been in an accident. What happened? He fell from scaffolding at the construction site. Nothing life-threatening, but he broke his leg and he's going to need surgery. I felt the familiar pull of obligation, the automatic response to drop everything and rush to help. But this time, I paused. Because here's the thing about family emergencies. They're only emergencies if you make them emergencies. Is he okay? He will be, but the recovery is going to be long. He can't work for several months, and his insurance doesn't cover everything. There it was. The setup for another crisis that would somehow become my responsibility. Mom, I'm sorry Derek was hurt, but I'm not getting involved in his recovery planning. He's asking for you. I'm sure he is. Layla, he's your brother. Yes, he is. And if he wants a relationship with me, he can follow the boundaries we've established. That means no contact until he's completed his probation and demonstrated actual change. But he's hurt. Being hurt doesn't erase the things he did to me. It doesn't magically restore trust or create a relationship where none exists. I don't understand how you can be so cold. And there was the accusation I'd been expecting. Cold, unfeeling, lacking in family loyalty. The same criticisms that had kept me trapped in dysfunctional patterns for years. Mom, choosing not to be manipulated isn't cold. It's healthy. We're not trying to manipulate you. Aren't you? Derek's hurt, so I should ignore the identity theft and the lies and the danger he put me in? That's not love, Mom. That's manipulation. Family is supposed to be there for each other. Family is supposed to protect each other, too. Derek didn't protect me from criminals. He didn't protect our parents from his lies. He put his own needs ahead of everyone else's safety and well-being. Why should I prioritize his needs when he's never prioritized mine? The conversation ended with Mom hanging up on me, frustrated and angry that I wouldn't bend to family pressure. An hour later, Dad called. "Layla, your mother is upset." "I know, Dad. Derek really is hurt. I understand that. But Derek being hurt doesn't change the fact that he stole my identity and put me in danger with criminals. That's in the past now. Dad, it was 6 months ago. And Derek has been in counseling for 6 months, during which time he's made no effort to actually make amends or demonstrate that he's changed. What kind of amends do you want?" It was a fair question, and one I'd thought about extensively during my own therapy sessions. I want Derek to complete his probation without violations. I want him to pay back the money he stole from me. I want him to acknowledge the full scope of what he did without minimizing or making excuses. And I want him to demonstrate over time that he's capable of handling his own problems without involving other people. That could take years. Dad, Derek spent 32 years learning to manipulate and lie and steal. Changing those patterns is going to take more than a few months of mandated counseling. So you're writing him off? No, I'm protecting myself while giving him space to actually change. If Derek is serious about making amends, he'll understand why I need those boundaries. That night, I sat in my apartment thinking about the choice I'd made. Part of me felt guilty for not rushing to Derek's bedside, for not offering financial help during his recovery, for maintaining boundaries even when it would be easier to cave. But a larger part of me felt proud. Proud that I'd learned to distinguish between love and enabling. Proud that I'd chosen my own well-being over family approval. Proud that I was building a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Coffee tomorrow? I want to hear about your photography class." I smiled and texted back, "Definitely. And thanks for checking in." This was what healthy relationships looked like. People who cared about my happiness without expecting me to sacrifice it for their comfort. People who celebrated my achievements without wondering how they could benefit from them. People who respected my boundaries instead of testing them. Derek's accident was a crisis, but it wasn't my crisis. Derek's recovery was a challenge, but it wasn't my challenge. For the first time in my life, I was truly free to live according to my own priorities, and it felt amazing. 1 year later, I was standing in the same kitchen where Mom had first demanded I sign over my apartment to Derek, but everything was different. I was hosting Thanksgiving dinner. Not because it was expected or because I was the only one willing to handle the work, but because I wanted to. The guests weren't the family members who'd spent years taking my efforts for granted. Instead, Jessica and her partner Emma were laughing at the counter while helping with appetizers. Marcus was debating sports statistics with 2 of my work colleagues who'd become close friends. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd become like a grandmother to me, was telling stories that had everyone in stitches. This was my chosen family, people who celebrated my achievements, respected my boundaries, and contributed to our relationships instead of just taking from them. Mom, Dad, and Derek weren't here. That decision had been easier than I'd expected. When Mom called in October to discuss holiday plans, she'd automatically assumed I'd be cooking for the family as usual. When I explained that I'd be hosting my own celebration and they weren't invited, the reaction was exactly what I'd predicted. "But we're your family," Mom had said, "and you're welcome to be part of my life when you're ready to respect the boundaries I've established." What about Derek? He's been doing well in his recovery. Has he completed his probation? Not yet, but has he paid back any of the money he stole from me? He's been having trouble finding steady work since the accident. Has he made any attempt to contact me to actually apologize or make amends? Silence. Mom, Derek has had a year to demonstrate that he's changed. The fact that he hasn't even tried tells me everything I need to know. The truth was, Derek had sent a few more letters through our parents, each one carefully crafted to sound remorseful while subtly suggesting that I was being unreasonable by maintaining no contact. He'd never directly apologized to me, never taken full responsibility without adding qualifiers, and never made any effort to actually repair the damage he'd caused. More telling, according to Detective Rodriguez, Derek had violated his probation twice. Once for failing to report to his probation officer, once for attempting to open a new credit account. Each violation had resulted in additional community service and extended supervision. Derek hadn't changed. He'd just gotten better at managing the appearance of compliance while looking for new ways to avoid responsibility. Some things never change, no matter how many therapy sessions you attend. "Layla," Marcus said, pulling me back to the present moment. "The turkey smells incredible." "Thanks. My first time cooking one this big." You've done an amazing job with everything. I looked around my apartment, warm with laughter and conversation and the kind of easy affection that comes from relationships built on mutual respect. This was what I'd been missing during all those years of family dinners where I'd done all the work and received none of the appreciation. You know what the best part is? I said to Marcus. What's that? No one here expects me to do everything myself. Jessica brought wine and appetizers. Emma made dessert. Mrs. Patterson contributed her famous roles. Everyone pitched in because they wanted to, not because they were assigned tasks. Revolutionary concept, Marcus said with a smile. For me, it really is. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Jessica pulled me aside. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret cutting off your family? I considered the question seriously. I regret that they chose Derek's comfort over my well-being. I regret that they never learned to see me as an individual, rather than as Derek's support system. I regret that they taught me to believe my worth was tied to how much I sacrificed for other people. But do you regret leaving? Never. Not for a single day. Even during the holidays? Even when you see families that seem happy and functional? Jess, look around. This is my family now. These are people who care about my happiness without expecting me to earn it through sacrifice. These are people who celebrate my achievements instead of figuring out how to use them for their own benefit. And Derek? Do you think there's any chance you'll reconcile? If Derek ever actually changes, and I mean real change, sustained over years, not just temporary compliance when he's facing consequences, then maybe we can have some kind of relationship. But it would be a new relationship built on new terms. What would that look like? Derek would have to acknowledge the full scope of what he did to me, without minimizing or making excuses. He'd have to demonstrate through actions over time that he's capable of handling his own problems. He'd have to respect the boundaries I set instead of constantly testing them. And your parents? My parents would have to choose to support those boundaries instead of enabling Derek's manipulation. They'd have to learn to value my well-being equally with his. Do you think that's possible? I watched Marcus helping Mrs. Patterson to her coat, Emma packaging leftover dessert for everyone to take home, Jessica loading my dishwasher without being asked. This was what healthy relationships looked like. People contributing without keeping score, celebrating each other without hidden agendas, offering support without expecting something in return. Honestly, I don't think my birth family is capable of that kind of change. They're too invested in the dysfunction, too comfortable with Derek being the center of attention, and me being the responsible one who fixes things. And that's okay with you? It has to be okay with me. I can't control their choices, but I can control mine. And I choose this. People who see my worth, respect my boundaries, and contribute to my happiness instead of taking from it. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was sitting in my quiet apartment with a cup of tea, my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. I answered cautiously. Hello? Layla? It's Derek. My stomach clenched. Derek, you're not supposed to contact me directly. I know, but it's Thanksgiving, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Sorry for what? Specifically? For everything. For the apartment thing. For the identity theft. For putting you in danger. It was the most direct apology I'd ever heard from him, but something in his tone made me cautious. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation. Derek, where are you calling from? I'm back at Mom and Dad's. I thought you were in the halfway house. I was, but there was a misunderstanding with my probation officer. A misunderstanding. Even now, even during what was supposed to be an apology, Derek couldn't take full responsibility for his choices. Some people never learn. Derek? What kind of misunderstanding? It's complicated, but the point is I miss you. I miss having you in my life. Do you miss me, or do you miss having someone to solve your problems? That's not fair, isn't it? Derek, you're calling me because you're in trouble again, aren't you? Silence. Derek? Things have been difficult since the accident, and Mom and Dad are getting older. They can't help as much as they used to. There it was. Derek was back to his old patterns, looking for someone to manage his crisis, and he'd worked his way through the usual suspects until he got to me. Derek, I can't help you. You won't help me. I won't enable you. There's a difference. So you're just going to let me fail? Derek, I'm going to let you succeed or fail based on your own choices and efforts. That's what healthy adults do. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't put each other in danger. Family doesn't manipulate and lie and expect unconditional support regardless of their behavior. People make mistakes. Yes, they do. And then they face consequences and learn from those mistakes. Derek, you've been making the same mistakes for 32 years. When do the consequences start mattering enough for you to actually change? I hung up before he could answer. An hour later, Mom called. Layla, Derek said you hung up on him. Derek called me despite the no contact order. I ended the call as soon as I realized he was in trouble again and looking for someone to fix his problems. He's really struggling. I know, Mom. But struggling doesn't give him the right to violate the boundaries I've established. What if something happens to him? Mom, Derek is an adult. What happens to him is the result of his own choices and actions. I can't save him. And more importantly, I shouldn't save him. I don't understand how you can be so heartless. I understand how you can mistake boundaries for heartlessness. But loving someone doesn't mean enabling their destructive behavior. So that's it? You're never going to help family again? I'm never going to sacrifice my well-being for people who don't value it. But Mom, if you and Dad ever want a relationship with me that isn't centered around managing Derek's crises, I'm open to that. What would that look like? It would look like respect for my choices, celebration of my achievements, and recognition that I'm a separate person with my own life and priorities. I don't know if your father and I know how to do that. Then maybe it's time to learn. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling the weight of the decision I'd made and continued to make every day. Choosing myself over family dysfunction, choosing boundaries over guilt, choosing a life built on my own terms rather than other people's expectations. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I missed the familiarity of the old patterns, even when those patterns had been painful. There were holidays when I felt the absence of shared history and family traditions. But those moments were overshadowed by the peace of living without constant crisis, the joy of relationships built on mutual respect, and the satisfaction of achievements that belonged entirely to me. I owned my apartment, not just legally, but emotionally. I owned my decisions, my boundaries, and my future. Derek couldn't steal that from me anymore. My parents couldn't guilt me out of it anymore. For the first time in my life, I was completely, authentically free. And as I sat in my kitchen, looking at the photos on my refrigerator from dinner with my chosen family, I realized that freedom looked exactly like this. Ordinary moments filled with genuine affection, boundaries that were respected without question, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. The apartment that had started as a symbol of my independence had become something much more important. It was proof that I could build a life based on my own values, surrounded by people who saw my worth, in a space that reflected my choices rather than other people's expectations. Derek might never change. My parents might never learn to treat me as an equal rather than as Derek's support system. But that was their choice to make. I'd made mine. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to choose yourself over toxic family dynamics. Sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you choose for yourself.